Well, good morning, bon dia. I'm just going to go ahead and jump straight into the presentation. When I talk about Wireshark's history, I don't really spend a lot of time on the place where I was working at the time. And the place where I worked was a very small ISP with a lot of very large clients. And by small, I mean we had, about 20 people, and we were in the geographic bullseye center of the US, and we were very far away from Silicon Valley or Austin or Boston or any other technology center. And by large clients, I mean we had clients like AT&T and the Rolling Stones, and if you remember the Mission Impossible movie from 20 years ago, we had that website and all these other big clients. And one day, one of our salespeople came in and said, "We got Apple." And we set up a website for Apple. A short time later, we got two of these. These are Apple Network Server 700s, and I remember them distinctly because I was the system administrator and I was in charge of setting them up. They were the biggest and fastest, they were huge, biggest and fastest machines that Apple made at the time. And they ran Unix. Apple didn't make Unix, so they used IBM's Unix, which was AIX. And this was when I learned that I'm not very fond of AIX. But I got these all set up, and then our development team and our web design team came up with this. And this was Apple Designs. It was an online store in 1996 where you could buy Apple-branded T-shirts and hats and gear. No computers, but that's fine. Let me make sure I'm where I need to be. The reason I'm kind of focusing on Apple Designs is for a few reasons. One, to underscore that we were really small and we had these huge clients and we had to keep them happy. But another reason is because around 1997, a bunch of us got these. These are T-shirts with a date on them. And the T-shirt is to commemorate the introduction of Apple's Apple Store, the one that everybody's probably, well, not everybody, but a lot of you have probably used. And these are a mystery to me because we had nothing to do with Apple Store and they had nothing to do with our store, but we got these shirts. I don't know why. As far as mysteries go, it's a nice little mystery. I have bigger mysteries in life, like why all these people are contributing to this project or why I have such a wonderful wife and daughter. But it's a nice mystery. But sorry. The thing is, every time I see this shirt, I look at the date. And Karen, you'll have to maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but as I recall, this was probably within 3 weeks of when I started writing Ethereal. Whoop. Sorry. Oh, she doesn't know. Okay. But other than points on a timeline, this doesn't really have anything to do with Wireshark. But when I was with this ISP, we were working under some tight constraints. We had not a lot of resources. Maybe we had 3 or 5 Sun Spark stations that we had to host everything on, along with the Apple servers. And we had limited resources in which to keep our customers happy. And there were always more jobs than people, so everybody had more than one job. And so we came up with weird solutions for problems. I remember our dial-up servers ran a little hot and they tended to drop connections. And so one of our network guys, Rob, he came up with the solution of taking a box fan, which is one of the big square fans, and attaching it to the front of the rack. And it was ugly, but it kept our customers online and they were happy. We did a lot of stuff like that. We used a lot of open source, which is not a big controversial thing nowadays, but 20 years ago, it was almost unheard of, except in very specific circles. And finally, it was an environment where we made our own tools. We wrote a lot of our own stuff. And that's, was the environment where it occurred to me that it would be a good idea to write a protocol analyzer, and so I did. And this is probably a good time to introduce the people who have contributed to the protocol analyzer, the code at least. And I'd like to invite the core developers up and see if they want to introduce themselves.
Hello. In preparation for the keynote, my name is Roland, by the way. My main tasks in Wireshark basically changing the UI, making Laura happy, which changed from the last SharkFest, which was annoy Laura. So I got promoted to XCAP and a bunch of other stuff that interests me. I'm one of those guys on the team who doesn't do a lot of packet dissection. But in preparation to this keynote, Gerald sent us a short email asking us for our experience in Wireshark and what are the odd things we did with it. So I have a small little picture coming up. No, not yet.
Clear.
Because Wireshark is a packet analyzer, but while it is a packet analyzer, somebody, I think it was Richard, told us this week that the packets never lie. And I had a customer who was building a big installation in France. And so they sent me traces because the network wasn't working. And I said, yeah, you have about 30 devices on there, and they seem to be all working, but those devices didn't work, and they have some problems with it. No, we don't have 30 devices. Yeah, you do. No, we don't. This went back and forth for quite some time, and then I got an email where they wrote, oh, we found a cabinet.
No?
And it looked like that. Yeah. So this happens a lot in industrial automation, where there are IP67 devices, and they just built them someplace and forgot they were there and put some cover over it so that they don't get wet because there is wet clothes going over above them. And then dust settled on it and stuff like that. By the way, I got 3 emails this week. They found the cabinet basically every other day. By the end, we had the same tally. But this is what Wireshark can do as well. Packets don't lie, and it is a nice little story exemplating that. And it's always fun if you tell people, oh yeah, by the way, it's one of the biggest companies in France. It's had nothing to do with France in general, but it is a very big company that happened that too. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Richard Sharp, and I first started contributing to Wireshark, or Ethereal as it was then, in 1999, and that was because I was giving TCP/IP classes in Australia, and we stuck Windows 95 machines in front of the students because they were mostly with government organizations and the sorts of companies that used Windows at that stage, but we had to boot into DOS and run a DOS packet analyzer tool, which was a real pain. And I stumbled across Ethereal on the internet doing some web search somewhere, and I thought, hey, this is great, and I started writing some dissectors for the protocols that we taught. And I think the first dissector I wrote was the TFTP dissector, or maybe a BootP dissector. And I actually started writing it in an airline lounge in Adelaide, the Qantas Club lounge. I think because the bar wasn't open when I was travelling to the place I was going to, and I finished writing it while I was at this conference, so I then submitted it, and after that a few others happened as well. And so it's been great from my perspective.
Hello, good morning. I'm Peter. I'm from the Netherlands. My first encounter with Wireshark, or actually Ethereal, that was basically like playing around. I was like sitting in the library and found this funny program and pressed some buttons. And yeah, I had no idea what it was doing, but that's my earliest memory I have from playing with Ethereal, or what's now called Wireshark. And more recently, I started playing with Wireshark again, because I had some applications, some VNC client in the web browser, and I was curious, what was it doing? And since I was curious, I started thinking like, oh, Wireshark understands a lot of protocols. So you know what? I will fire up Wireshark and decrypt everything. And that way, I figured out like, oh, it's not working. And then the ball started rolling, and that's how I basically got into Wireshark. It's basically building on what you know. So I know. Okay, thanks, Janice. So I start building on what I already know. I knew about Wireshark, and I knew what it was able to do. And I could maybe do a little bit of programming, so I started just fixing it up, and well, in the end, I finally could see what the magic was happening behind the scenes.
Hello, I am Dario. I'm from Italy. Gerald told you something about the very early days of the project. It was 1997. A couple of years later, I started playing with Ethereal, so I am a very old user. And some years later, I started development. And some days ago, he asked us to tell you something about the ugliest hacks we have pushed into Wireshark. And I can remember, not ugly hacks, but blind programming. Because I don't own an iOS machine, but sometimes I've touched the code that needs a specific part to work on iOS. But I don't know an iOS machine, so I tried to patch the code to make it work with the help of them that told me how to change the code, but basically it was blind programming. And so I thought it finally, what I pushed was the right thing. For instance, when I work on the full screen feature of Wireshark. But then it turned out that on Apple, there is another way to do that. So come on, blind program is not a good way to program. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Graham. I'm from the UK. I work in the SCADA industry, telemetry, and once upon a time that all used to be serial links, point-to-point links, and you had to buy very expensive serial analyzers to look at the data. And then in the late 90s, those links started to be moved over IP, basically serial over IP, so we could capture them with tools, but the tools were still very expensive. But then up came Ethereal, and that was great, except it didn't have dissectors for our telemetry protocols. So that's how I got started, writing DMP3 dissector, and then making the Windows version of Wireshark a little bit better. For a long time, I think I was the only Windows developer. And continued since those days, so nearly 2 decades now of contributing to Wireshark.
My name is Jaap. I'm also from the Netherlands. Early 2000, I was working for what you can call a large light bulb manufacturer in the Netherlands. And we were working on IP enabling our PBX product. We had these very nice, expensive HP Internet Advisor boxes, and those were not IP enabled. So we looked for IP enabled variations of that, but not with the same impressive price tag. So we stumbled upon Ethereal and looked at that and thought, oh, it's interesting, but it's not doing those VoIP over IP things. So we added those in, and those were accepted by Gerald. So I thought, okay, this might be something useful. I've looked at the mail archives, and I joined in September 2004. Posted my first questions. Was annoyed by certain things Ethereal did or did not do, so I started to send in some patches about documentation, RTP player stuff. I did some dissector work, and eventually Gerald dropped me an email. Do you want to join the core developer group? I said, oh, okay. And I'm stuck since then in this group. While doing that, Gerald asked us for the ugliest hack we ever put into production, and I really had to think about that. But now I knew that we could look at the network traffic. I knew that our customers would be doing that as well. And we could have logs coming out of this system, and we knew that there were some customers who were quite smart and who could read those log files and start to ask nasty questions. So we didn't want to do that. So we looked at encrypting this stuff. So I implemented ROT 13. They never found out.
Not it did.
Hi, my name is Anders Broman. I work for Ericsson, and I'm from Sweden. back in 2003, we were our group I was working with was moving out of working on fixed network exchanges, AXE, which had its own built-in trace system. And we started on this small IP project with voice over IP and video calls. And of course, we needed something similar to look at the communication between the boxes to see what's going on. There was this guy showing me a program called Ethereal. And by the way, you can write patches for it. Great. So he had actually done a couple of patches, but never sent them in. So I took his patches, sent them in, and improved on them. And down that road we went. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sake Blok. I'm also from the Netherlands. We have a big company here now. I have my own company, troubleshooting network issues, and I used to work for an internet service provider just like Gerald halfway in the 90s, and I had got no clue that you could even do packet capture. And then I moved to a big bank in Holland, and they had all kinds of sniffers, expensive ones. And then a colleague pointed me to Ethereal, and I'm one of the guys that say Ethereal instead of Ethereal. But, so I started using that, and I've been using it for a couple of years, and I needed some extra features. And so I joined the mailing list and asked about something and got a response, and then I thought, oh, it's open source, maybe I can do it myself, I can program a bit. So that's how I started working with Wireshark, or E3 at the time. I developed the HiDPI X404 filter because I needed it in a proxy and load balancing setup. And that kind of got me enthusiastic because, hey, I can change things and I can make it work the way I want to make it work. And so I started developing, and since I was a Windows user at the time, I needed a Windows build, but I didn't have a Windows development environment because it was more complex than a Linux development environment. So I just sent in my patches, and then nagging all the core developers like, okay, can you please add it because I need the automatic build. And that's probably how Gerald invited me to join, because he was sick of me nagging for building this stuff.
Hello everyone, my name is João Valverde. I'm the local guy from the team. I work for a company called ENGN Technologies, mostly in network visibility and troubleshooting. But around 2014, I was doing some research on IPv6 multi-homing, which the industry has been debating for around the past 15 years, and I was trying to solve it, and I didn't, by the way. But I was already very familiar with Wireshark as a user, but I started doing some work with the custom IPv6 extension headers, so patching Wireshark and experimenting with the different use cases for extension headers. And while doing that, I started working more closely with the code and finding a few bugs and other stuff that I thought could be improved, mostly around for the IPv6 sector in particular, a lot of IPv4 thinking applied to it, which I find is a somewhat common pattern. So anyway, I started contributing, and the patch turnaround was very quick on the project, so that was fun. And always an enjoyable experience, so I became a regular contributor since then. And so that's how I became involved in Wireshark. Thank you.
Yeah. Am I on? Okay. And these are some of Wireshark's core developers. They're the ones who are responsible for what you download and install. We're going to be hanging around in the developer den, so if you want to stop by any time and if you have any questions or just want to visit, go ahead. You're welcome to. And on with the show. People ask me occasionally how many people use Wireshark, and the answer is I don't know. I don't know how many people, each day pull up Wireshark and start analyzing packets. I have no way of knowing that. What I can tell you is that on the servers that the operations team and I manage, which is a few, more than 1 million people download Wireshark per month and have done so for many, many months. That just counts the servers we manage. That doesn't count mirrors, that people run of Wireshark. That doesn't count Linux distributions. So, this is kind of a lower bound. And I can also tell you this very, very misleading statistic here, which is that of the downloads we serve, 93% are for Windows. And that's because Windows is the only platform that updates itself. So it's the only platform that's continually downloading itself. If we had automatic downloads for Mac OS, that would be a different number. If we had, if we offered Linux packages, that number would be different as well. And I'm not going to read the rest of it, but Wireshark has lots of stuff, and it's written by lots of people and lots of lines of code. So, oops. When I worked at the ISP, our CEO would occasionally send out mission statements. Have you ever had to deal with a mission statement at your company? We got them occasionally, which meant that the direction of the company changed all the time. And our particular CEO went from sending out mission statements to vision statements, which was exciting. So I kind of have avoided doing that with Wireshark. I'm very shy about that sort of thing now. But if we did have any sort of mission or goal, it would be this, to help as many people as possible understand their networks as much as possible. And I think that's an important and useful thing. I am hoping that you are of the same opinion because you showed up here. But this is an important thing. It's important for people to understand their networks around them. Otherwise, people make bad decisions about security. They make bad decisions about the products they use or the websites they visit or the policies they put in place or the laws they pass. It's important for people to be aware of how networks work and how it affects their lives. So in order to get to that goal, we need to get past a few obstacles. As with any other product, Wireshark has what are called barriers to entry, meaning these are the things that keep people from even looking or considering your product. There are also expectations you have to manage about what Wireshark can and can't do. Wireshark doesn't do everything. And I don't know that I would want it to, because that would take our line of code count up to something huge and hideous. And there are also mental models about how networks work in general that you need to make sure that people have correct versions of. As an example of the barriers to entry, if you type "is Wireshark" into Google, this is what it did for me. Is Wireshark safe, free, legal? You get this sort of impression that people, watch Mr. Robot and then they, base their opinion based on that on Wireshark. That people think it's some sort of forbidden magic to look at a network, and it's not. Packets are just packets. They're just things that computers send to each other. If you attend to any of Laura's classes, she will tell you that one of the tragedies of this industry is that people look at packets as a last resort for troubleshooting. When for troubleshooting, maybe packets are the first thing you should look at. At a lot of companies, I'm very fortunate because I got a Riverbed laptop. And when Riverbed gives their employees a laptop, that laptop has Wireshark pre-installed, which is awesome. But most companies don't let you do that, or they will outright forbid installing Wireshark or looking at the network. And as I said a couple of slides ago, it's not such a big deal today, but at a lot of companies, you just can't use open source products. And Wireshark is open source. That's an important aspect of this project. And there are also expectations that you have to adjust. These are just a sample of some of the questions we've gotten, over the probably the past couple of years about, people wanting to use Wireshark to do various things. And these are frustrating to me for two reasons. One, this shows that we aren't setting expectations correctly for people going into the project. Wireshark maybe, can help you hack a Hotmail password. Hotmail's on there somewhere. Maybe, you can do that, but there are other tools that are much more suited to that and let you do that much more efficiently and effectively. The other reason I'm really frustrated about this is because a couple of slides ago you saw that Wireshark has 2.6 million lines of code written by these guys. They worked very hard to add very useful features for their employers and their industries. And as far as I know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but none of you showed up to work one day and your boss said, "Hey, can you add a feature to Wireshark to let me hack my neighbor's Wi-Fi because he's a jerk?" So, this is just something we have to manage with the product. Angelo's done an excellent job with the main Wireshark website. When you go to the www.wireshark.org, it looks very commercial and slick. It doesn't look like your typical hacker tool that people, I don't have anything against hacker tools per se, but it doesn't look like that sort of website. It's not black screen with green text, which is the kind of the typical thing. And I'm all about the black screen with the green text, I'll tell you. And it's not just novices that have bad mental models. I have bad mental models, and I have bad mental models because of these. These are a particular model of switch that haven't been made in 15 years, oops. But I remember setting up a span port on these switches, and the network slowed down. And it's because of this part of the manual that says, when you set up a span port, the switch is going to hold every packet in memory until it's delivered to the outgoing port, which is a terrible way to make a switch. Even today, when I set up a span port or a monitor port, when I'm about to hit enter, I kind of do this because I don't want to take down the network. And this is a good reason that I don't teach courses here at SharkFest, because my head is full of really old, obsolete, crappy information like that. I'm so much happier that all the other instructors are teaching courses because their information is much more current and more accurate. So in order to improve these expectations and these models, there are a bunch of things we can do. One is to attend or teach at or host a protocol analysis conference. And so congratulations to everybody here for doing that. But no, that does a lot to spread knowledge and share knowledge and make sure that people have accurate models in their head about protocol analysis. And it's not just here at SharkFest. If you look at throughout the year, all the presenters who are teaching here, they're either teaching the other 12 months of the year, or they're writing blogs, or they're sharing information. My Twitter feed is just full of people who share things about protocol analysis, and it's great. For our part, the operations team and I try to make sure that information is readily available on Wireshark's various websites, not only on the main site, but the mailing lists. We have ask.wireshark.org, which is a question and answer site. We try to keep that as functional as possible, which is more difficult than it should be. But yeah, we try to do that. Another really cool thing I think, or at least I think is really cool, is that there's this whole industry that's centered around capturing and analyzing packets. I mean, there are a lot more companies involved in doing this than I thought there would be. And if you looked at the vendors last night, you can see that there's this whole thriving industry around doing this. And I'm excited about that just because there are all these companies that are focused on making sure people know what's going on their network. So along with all the mental models and expectations and stuff, Wireshark has development challenges. We have stuff that we have to overcome when we produce Wireshark. And if you ask me what our main challenges are each day, I'm probably going to give you different answers, but these were the main challenges when I typed up this slide. One of the things sorry, I keep bumping my mic, but one of the things that bugs me continually is we only use one of your cores. My laptop has, I think, 8 cores. I'm sure your laptops have between 4 and 16. And we use maybe 1.1 core when we're analyzing a packet list. And that's very inefficient. And it's becoming more and more of a problem. And hopefully we can fix it at some point. Another problem is that if somebody handed you an Excel spreadsheet with 1 million rows, you'd yell and scream and say, no, I need this in a different format. This is not useful. At the same time, if you load up a capture with 1 million packets, people have no problems looking at this packet list, which is effectively a giant spreadsheet with 1 million rows. And maybe we could do a better job of presenting lots of information, maybe aggregating it better. We've talked about various ways of doing that, but haven't come up with something that we want to do yet. Another problem is that interesting packets are elsewhere. Even in my house, if I'm capturing on my wired network segment, I'm not necessarily going to see wireless packets and vice versa, much less in a VM environment, I'm not going to see host in the various parts of my VM environment or in the cloud. Cloud's even worse. So as the packet list goes, is Rolf here? Years ago, Rolf showed us some code that a student friend of his wrote that had a nice high-level view of all the hosts talking to each other in Wireshark. And I feel really bad because we weren't able to use that code due to licensing issues. Maybe we should probably revisit that. But this is not exactly like that, but this is something similar. If you pull up Chrome, you also get this high-level view of what your browser is doing. This is the Chrome developer window, and if you pull up the network tab and load a web page, you can see all the objects that your browser downloads and a timeline and all this other useful information. And whoa, I keep tripping over that. Sorry. We kind of give you this in the conversation list, but the conversation list you have to drill down to, and you can't watch, you can't view it while you're capturing, and it's not quite as useful as it could be, and it's maybe not as useful as the host view that Pascal Rolf's friend had. And so, maybe this is something we can talk about this week, doing. We keep talking about it, but we never do it. And a big example of packets being elsewhere is the cloud. Cloud capture just isn't good. If you want to capture on AWS or Azure or Google or DigitalOcean or wherever, you get to run TCP dump. That's pretty much your option. I remember last spring, we migrated our infrastructure to Amazon, which it works well enough. But one of our core developers was having trouble downloading code from our source code repository, and my only option was to log into a box, run TCP dump, download that capture, look at it, and wash, rinse, and repeat. We had to do that maybe 4 or 5 times just to track down the problem, and that's just not good. At the ISP, we had 3Com SuperStack 2 switches. These are horrible, crappy, terrible switches, but they have monitor ports. These terrible switches had a feature that Amazon doesn't. And I really wish Amazon had some sort of span or tap feature that you could pull traffic off of an EC2 instance. That would be so useful. So the original title of this slide was Windows HiDPI is a trash fire, but I thought I'd be nice to Microsoft. One of the things I love about SharkFest is that I get to see people use Wireshark, firsthand and in person. And at SharkFest this past summer in the US, I noticed that people had Windows laptops and HiDPI screens, which is nice, but Wireshark looked terrible, and I wasn't sure why. So I went back to the office and I sent an email to my boss and said, I need to troubleshoot HiDPI on Windows. Can I have a 4K display? And Glenn said yes. And I have an awesome boss, so I have a 4K monitor now. And no, seriously, this is something you should do. If you write software and the software runs on Windows, you need to tell your boss you need to troubleshoot HiDPI on Windows so you can get a 4K monitor. But this is from a Windows blog, Microsoft blog, and it talks about all the different HiDPI issues you can run into on Windows and how they're trying to fix it. And to give credit where credit is due, they are working on this issue, and they're making improvements with each version of Windows 10. Like Creators Update has newer APIs for dealing with HiDPI screens, but it's still a work in progress. We're just not there yet. And when I got back to work, I got the HiDPI display, and this is the best I could do with Wireshark. This is a screenshot of that display. I'm running Windows 10 Creators Update, the very latest one. This is Wireshark Git Master using the latest version of Qt. And the important thing to note here in the screen is that the only thing that's correctly sized is the title bar of the main window at the very top. The main window content is slightly too big because between Qt and Windows, we can only do 100% or 200% magnification. So, you take 200% divided by 125%, you get 1.6, and that text is about 1.6 times too big. The scroll bar is a little it's more narrow here than it is here. I don't know why. That's a Qt bug. And the thing that kills me is if you look at the file dialog, it's zoomed in. It's smaller than it should be, even on the high-resolution display. And I don't know, I think that's a Windows bug. I haven't seen anybody else report that, but I've seen other Windows applications do that as well. But if you're running a HiDPI display on Windows, I don't know what to tell you other than, yeah, I know it's broken and we're working on a fix, but we're not there yet. So we have other challenges with Wireshark, like, networks are always getting faster and it's always more difficult to capture packets. We have a lot of people who that's their job to make machines that write packets to disk as fast as possible, and it's always a challenge to try to keep up with that. Wireshark has always only let you open one file, which that was a bad decision on my part early on, but that's something we're stuck with. If we could open more than one file, we could add a whole bunch of other features like doing a diff of a packet trace or a whole bunch of other stuff. And Wireshark is written in C, which was maybe not such a bad decision in 1996 or 1997, but nowadays there are all these other languages that are competing with C, like Go and Rust and Dart and Nim and just a whole bunch of others. And I wish there was an obvious choice that everybody could use, but that's not the case. I mean, these new languages are sometimes faster. Most of them have better memory safety and other features like that. So that's something we should look at. And as far as the future goes for Wireshark, I can never say for certain that we're going to do this particular thing or add this particular feature just because these guys work for other companies. I can't tell them what to do. But but we do have directions that we want to go and directions that are obvious. And maybe you guys want to come back up and talk about where you want to take Wireshark, or uh-oh. Don't have to if you don't want to, that's fine.
I have just one. Could you go back to the slide with the Chrome?
Sure. Oh, nope. There.
Yeah. When is the next SharkFest Europe? Janice? Oh, she's not here? I think in about a year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Next year.
I want to have this as my main screen. This is my goal for the next year. So, you see, I'm getting constantly promoted in the LoRa area.
If you do want that screen, you have to send beer tokens to Roland.
No.
Yeah.
The thing is that, as I mentioned before, I'm working for a company, same as Graham. He's doing SCADA, I'm doing industrial automation. My Ethernet basically works completely different than your Ethernet most of the time will do. And I really don't care about what's in the packets. The only thing I really do care about is in which intervals they arrive. So the only information I'm interested in is in the delta time displayed. And the packet list, for those of you who tried it, is really ill-suited for making those decisions. Also, I really don't care about the byte view. I know what bytes are in there. They're always pretty much the same because it's process data, so it doesn't change ever, if at all. And I want to have this view to see events happening on the network. So this is where I want to get Wireshark to be going. The second thing is something you won't see, but hopefully we achieve that, is we want to get rid of all the GTK glue code, and in this regard of something called GTK. One of the main reasons I'm very active as a core developer is to get rid of the old interface, not to annoy people. So if you are relying, and this is something is a call out to you, if you're relying on Wireshark 1.12 for whatever reason, and speed is not an obvious reason, but for functionality, for RTP comes into mind, for instance, in this regard, then please send us emails, please send us a bug report about what's missing in 2 point something if you haven't done already. Because we are moving in that direction. We're moving away from 1.12. And just one question I wanted to ask during the keynote. Who here is using 1.12? Besides Sake. Sake doesn't count.
Yeah.
Who here is using 1.12 because it cannot help it? Or he needs a feature relying on 1.12. Okay. Who here is using another platform than Windows? So that's a smaller tally. Yeah. So sorry, but we're gonna drop 112s at some point in the future. And so if you're still relying on some features or is still something not working the way you want it to do, then please send us an email.
Thanks. All right. Oh, it's 20 after. Okay, we need to wrap up. So I think I'm going to finish off with this. This is a picture. I went shopping for a jacket a while back. And when I'm talking about expectations and mental models and all that stuff, this is the tag in the jacket. And you can see in the US, this is large. And in Europe, it's extra large. And it occurred to me that this shows in as few words as possible as much information as it can about expectations and mental models and physical models. But I thought it was just so hilarious, I had to take a picture of it. I bought a different jacket. But anyway, I would like to finish up by saying thank you. Wireshark is a great and wonderful thing, and it's a great and wonderful thing because of its contributors, because of you, because of the attendees and the instructors and the developers. And I can't believe that I've been taken on this journey, and I'm very thankful to you guys for everything that you do to help the project. So thank you. What?